Hello everyone, my name is Mariam and you're listening to Dystopia Podcast. My guest for today's episode is Jamal, the host of Jins, the first podcast on Arab and Muslim people's sexualities. In his podcast, he talks about deconstructing stereotypes around the position of women in Muslim countries and societies, gender equality and LGBTQ+ rights in Islam. He had the chance to interview many thinkers, Islamologists, sexologists, imams, such as Shirin Kankan, Denmark's first female imam, Dr. Amina Wadoud, one of the first thinkers and researchers on Quran studies, gender, sexuality, and Islamic feminism, Asma al-Mrabit, a doctor and a Muslim feminist who wrote many books reflecting on the position of women in the Quran, and a lot of other amazing icons. I'm very happy to welcome the outstanding Jamal. Thank you for accepting my invitation.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me.
So, in today's episode, we will talk about the position of women in Muslim countries and societies and in the Quran. Feminism and Islam, two terms which are often perceived as contradictory and paradoxical. The position of women in Muslim societies is often characterized by oppressions and denial of rights, and culture often clouds religion. The Quran, hadith, and other Islam sources have been interpreted historically by men in a misogynistic manner that disempowers and demeans women. Asma Barlas said in her book Believing Women in Islam, and I quote, Muslim breed patriarchal and sexual inequality into the Quran on the basis both of specific verses and the Quran's different treatment of women and men with regard to such issues as marriage, divorce, and inheritance. From these, they infer that men and women are not only biologically different, but also unequal, and are opposites, a view mirrored in the claim that in Islam, the masculine and the feminine principles are also strictly separated. She, along other female thinkers, try to reinterpret the Quran from a feminist perspective. This leads me to my first question. Why is it important to unread patriarchal interpretations of the Quran?
Simply because 14 centuries of Islamic thoughts have produced a legacy of readings of the Quran written almost entirely by men. So it's obviously very important to unread patriarchal interpretations of the Quran. I know that Muslim progressives have long argued that it is not the religion, but patriarchal interpretation and implementation of the Quran that have kept women oppressed and also marginalized populations. And for many, the way to reform is the re-examination and reinterpretation of religious texts, because it is very important to remember what has been really said in the Quran, in even in the hadiths, of course, but just knowing, for example, you talked about heritage, that you have more than 30 ways to inherit more as a woman in the Quran than for men. And that is not really often said. Women actually more and more contribute to a gender inclusive reading, to one of the most fundamental disciplines in Islamic thoughts, which is Quranic exegesis. And because Islam belongs to all its believers, women and black women and queer people and people who are not Arab, all of these people can have their own interpretations of the Quran. And yet, despite much Quranic evidence about the significance of women, um, gender reform in Muslim society has been stubbornly resisted. And I think of one point that I've been much more vocal about is about female imamship, for example. The existence of mosques for women belongs to Islamic traditions, and yet there has always been some kind of reluctance to think about female imamship. And the Quran says nothing about women imams, but it points out that women are equal to men, that they are equal partners spiritually, intellectually, and socially. I can think of the example of Waraka, who was a woman renowned for her ability to recite the Quran in its entirety, and who in Medina led a Friday prayer before a mixed assembly with the permission of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Um, the Hadiths reports that after fleeing from Mecca to settle in Medina, the Prophet opened a mosque in his house where two women led the prayers, and these two women were his wives. One was Aisha, his third wife, and the other was Salama, his sixth wife. So after the death of the Prophet in 632, the first Caliph Abu Bakr, father of Aisha, he put 2 years and improved the practice of the female imam as his daughter embodied it. I can think of even Ibn Rushd, uh, Ibn Rushd, who was attesting to the same thing in his work, in his Encyclopedia of Islamic Jurisprudence. I can think of Tabari, who is a historian and exegete of the Quran, who authorized also women imams to lead the prayer, both in front of men and women. I can think of um, Islamic scholars like Abu Thawr, Ibn Arabi, of course, Al-Muzani, who also authorized female imamship. So women have also been incredible masters of religion and tradition, but their contribution has been erased from history. It's only been like half a century that we remember how, for example, Aisha was probably the most knowledgeable person there ever was in Islam. Um, and I can think of the amazing Moroccan feminist Fatima Mernissi, who talked about, quote unquote, the forgotten queens of Islam. So all of that to say, there is an urgent need to unread all the patriarchal interpretations of the Quran, because this is where we can find that it is 14 centuries of patriarchy that has completely shadowed the idea of gender equality in the Quran, and not religious thoughts and religion itself.
يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا.
So, Islamic feminism enables Muslim women and men to reconcile their faith with their commitment to women's rights, LGBTQ plus rights, and their feminist values. I would like to mention one of my favorite Tunisian writers, Olfa Youssef. She was the
Mhm.
first woman in Tunisia and the Arab world to witness a wedding contract along with the mother of the groom. This caused a lot of controversy since it is known that marriage in Islam usually consists of two male witnesses or one male and two female witnesses. She
Mhm.
also published many books talking about inheritance, patriarchal structures within religious institutions, polygamy, sexuality, homosexuality, gender. In your opinion, how Islamic feminism could shape gender equality and include different identities?
Oh, in many ways, of course. Well, it's true that Alfa Youssef is one trailblazer in the realm of how to rethink women independence and how it could be reframed within Muslim and Islamic thought. I think probably it comes from, also Tunisia is also the realm of statewide feminism, thanks to Habib Bourguiba's setup on so many reforms that could allow women to be freer, I would say, in terms of abortion, in terms of sexual rights, etc. Even if obviously it doesn't really convert into social mindset that are very open, because of obviously the Islamic atmosphere in Tunisia v- can also be very coercive towards women. And obviously, I can think of the Jasmine Revolution of 2011, etc. But what I would say around um, this idea that Islamic feminism could shape gender equality is that Islam honors and protects women, and it grants them full rights. Actually, men and I can also say I'm pleased to say sometimes that the Quran is actually a very feminist book in itself for the time, because men and women were created from one unique soul. In the Quran, it is stated that it's created from nafs wahida. So it's really about gender equality. And then the Messenger of Allah, Muhammad, said, "In this word, women and perfume have been made dear to me, and my comfort has been provided in prayer." So it is very stated that women are obviously created as equals, essentially, in their essence, I mean. But however, the many Muslims and governments appropriate Islamic texts to justify discrimination against women and to impose social and legal restrictions on women's rights and freedom. Um, and then I can also say maybe that Western Islamophobic um, neo Orientalists would use these popular yet traditional misogynistic readings of Islam to support their claims against Islam and Muslims. There is a lot of xenophobia and Islamophobia uh, when people from the far right in Europe or in the US or in North America use these patriarchal readings to shape gender inequality in Islam rather than equality. But when you have the opportunity and marveling moments of chance to talk to Amina Wadoud and Asma Marabat and Malika Hamidi in Belgium and Annie Zonveld in California in the US, like me, all these brilliant Islamic feminists and women imams who really, really know what they're talking about and who studied that a lot, who shed a light on a different interpretation of the Quran, free of the prism of patriarchy, then you get closer to the truth about Islam. And it's true that most of them are talking about the inward dimension of Islam. This is actually exactly how Sufis are spreading out a vision of Islam as a religion of peace and love, and how women are substantially and essentially ontologically equal to men in respects of humanity. And I wanted to really if I can remember right, this quote from the great master Ibn Arabi, the great master of all, one of the most incredible scholars and mystics in Islamic history, probably the most influential Muslim scholar of all time, who is also a poet and philosopher, and who is at the origin of Sufism. He had an expression that said, if I translate it right, is humanity unites male and female, and in it, maleness and femaleness are contingencies, not to human reality, but he made it equal. Male and female are equal. Therefore, he agreed that women should be able to have the same rights and to lead the prayer unconditionally, and praised women's spiritual aptitudes as well as for men. So there's really something um, at the core of Islam that leads to better rights for people of different races, different sexual orientations, different genders, different abilities, different ethnicities, obviously, because again, Islam is not just for Arabs. You have the biggest populations of Muslims in Indonesia, and it's talked also to like incredible Islamic feminists like Zaina Anwar in my podcast, who is Malaysian. Um, there is also an entire queer history that shows how homosexuality is not really a word from the Quran, that it's not something that is forbidden or condemned whatsoever. That even the concept of loan in the Quran, loan as a color in the Quran, we can think about colors of the skin, but also colors of the soul. And it means every single, it could mean every single color of the rainbow, as we have in the rainbow flag for queer people. So it's really different types of identities and different types of equalities that are put forward in the Quran, in the very core of Islam, as a religion of peace, and not as something that is shaped for coercion and violence and anti-women and anti-queer, anti-blackness, etc.
True. First of all, I'm really amazed with how much you know about Tunisia and the feminist movement in Tunisia. So, as you said, women's as you said, women's rights and freedom are often established under Western norms,
Yeah.
and they are rarely perceived in Muslim contexts. Fighting for gender equality and Muslim women's empowerment through Western feminism often fail. On the other hand, Islamophobic and Western attack on Muslim societies and women can leave Muslim women in a difficult position between wanting equal rights and keeping their faith. Asma Lamrabit says in her book Women in the Quran and Emancipatory Reading, for a long time, the question of the status of Muslim women has been taken hostage between two extreme interpretations: a very rigid conservative Islamic approach and a Western Islamophobic and ethnocentric approach. I know you talk about this a lot in your podcast. So my question is, how important is it to include Muslim women in the feminist movement instead of only recognizing a Western approach?
um that's a very broad question. I think first of all,
Mhm.
I think every feminist movement should be inclusive of Muslim or Islamic feminism, obviously. That the inclusion of women is not even a question for me. Like I don't even reckon how that could be a question today in 2023. And
True.
it's true that for a man to say that, I don't know where, like, is it really my place to say this? But I'll still give you my point of view, even if, like, we talked about like Tunisian um, authors like Olfa Youssef, but I can think of
Yeah.
like a Tunisian feminist who is a man. Sorry, an Egyptian feminist who is a man. Um,
Mhm.
who is Qasim Amin, and who is often referred to as like a liberator of the feminist cause in Egypt, saying that, like, if women were um, obliged to wear a veil, like, why should men wear a veil? Like, why not for men to wear a veil too, you know? And so this position of
Yeah.
women's liberation is also something that could be endorsed by men. So I take it as an example to, like, still be an ally in this cause of feminism. But coming back to your question, I would say that when Western people say that Islam is a violent religion, especially against women, or that Islam prohibits homosexuality, they're never coming with strong sources. Actually, this is exactly what Orientalism has done to Arabs, basically.
Mhm.
So if you're interested in this, listeners, you can go read Professors Edward Said and Joseph Masaad on this. They're just coming with the point of view that is against this Orientalists who formed by unconscious biases what Western media is spreading since the beginning of the millennium, basically. And on the other end of the bigotry spectrum, um, under the name of Islam, you have many Muslims also, many Muslim scholars who claim that any evolution of the Quranic message is forbidden, that modernity is kind of a plague coming from the imperialists and the Western ideologies, and should not be applied. You also have this idea that Muslim women's issues are being put into a kind of battleground between the secular feminists and the Islamists, and also the far right movements in political chessboards in the West. And um, so they have burdens from everywhere, and they're like in a trap. Basically, they're trapped by all of these movements that are refusing their own kind of independence of thought and of action and movements. And that makes me think that Islamic or Muslim feminism needs to be included as an intersectional feminist movement within broader feminist movements. However, white secular feminist movements have often altered other feminist entities like black women, like indigenous people, like queer people, like Muslims, obviously, or Jewish people. So I think that Muslim women don't need anyone's permission, including white women, to be feminists. I think they have their own agency. They have the right to choose for their own bodies. I mean, this is like obvious. We cannot question every single time we see a woman with a hijab on her head.
Exactly, yeah.
We cannot question her agency, like, oh my God, so her father or her brother should be obliging her to wear hijab.
Mhm,
And in the same way,
mhm,
we cannot oblige a woman to wear the hijab because this is coming from their own relationship to faith, to religion, to God, if they think God exists. And this is their own damn rights. They have the right to choose for their own bodies. They don't have to wait for any validation or acceptance from anyone. And including, and sometimes I would say, even especially from other feminists who claim that their feminism is better. So, this is for me fundamental in a way that Islamic and intersectional feminism, at least for me, is leaving no one behind apart from bigots and patriarchs, obviously. But I honestly want to defend people who are differently abled, who are hijabis, who are trans, who are in the process of an abortion, who are black, who are Persian. I mean, my feminism is inclusive of Muslims because I believe the Quran has ushered a new era in terms of women's rights. My feminism is decolonial, it's intersectional, it's intercultural, it's focused on human rights, um, and it's not despite what we're saying about the Quran, but it's because of what's written in the Quran. This is for me what Islamic feminism should be um, discussed and spread around as. And for me, this
mhm,
feminism is the right one because is the only one that really
mhm,
defends and stands up for the rights of every single person who is marginalized in this society, in this worldwide society, apart from relativism and all the like the cultural aspects of all, we're saying like, yeah, it's so bad for Muslim women in Afghanistan. Yeah, it's so bad for women in Morocco or Tunisia. Yeah, it should be so. Yeah, but then whenever you come across like any kind of due diligence of the society that we have in the US or in France or in Italy, it's like
Mhm.
completely um, to grips with racism and xenophobia and Islamophobia and hatred and so many things that are so bad, like really bad for society and for a cohesive nation. So all of that to
Mhm.
say, for me, it's I defend a feminism that for me is the only definition of feminism, which is a humanism in a way that focuses on what's right for human beings, and what's right for human beings is granting human rights.
Yes, I love everything you said. Thank you so much. To share a personal story, I was once struggling to find a middle ground, I can say, between my faith, practicing my religion, and my commitment to defending women's rights.
Mm.
And listening to Jins, listening to your podcast helped me a lot in my journey.
Oh,
Seriously,
thank
for
you
that,
so
I would
much.
like to thank you.
Thank you so much. That's very moving for me.
It was a pleasure talking to you today. I know many girls like me, many Muslim women, and also men around the world, struggled in the same way. So, do you have any final words and any advices for people who are struggling between uh, keeping their feminist values and their faith?
Yes, I do have four final words. Please listen to Jins.
I totally agree.
No,
Yeah,
I mean,
you. I
honestly,
I totally agree.
I think it's just a question of, if you have like just any kind of question around Islam and sexuality and gender and
Mhm.
like your body and um your thoughts about religion, and if you're questioning anything, and you're in
Your
yeah,
sexuality.
sexuality, gender,
Yeah.
body, love, anything that at some point in your life you will question, that's for sure. This
Hmm.
is really the struggle I think everyone, including me, kind of shared in their lives. And I think it's time for some truth. It's time for us to be brought to life and to light, you know? Like we need
Yes.
to not struggle in the dark, because darkness can lead us to really bad times and bad spaces. And when I think about this,
Totally.
um, going backwards to the idea of being a Muslim and all of that, I have discussed with many scholars also the danger of questioning this, or actually not questioning all of these ideas and thoughts, and diving into darkness. And when you dive into darkness, being a Muslim and reading patriarchal interpretations of the Quran, then you might be prone to some kind of radicalization at some point. So my battle is not actually to promote sexuality wherever you go. If you are asexual, it's fine. If you are bisexual,
Mhm.
it's fine. If you are heterosexual, it's also fine. If you are heterosexual and you like sex, it's fine, etc., etc. So if you are a trans black hijabi woman who prays God every single day and goes to the mosque every Friday, and who likes sex and who wants to marry, okay, and have a family, then I'm
Mhm.
saying it's also fine. And it's not a judgment for me. The Quran is saying it's fine. So if you listeners don't believe what I'm saying, please go listen to Jins. Please go read and listen. And yeah, maybe my final word would be the first word that the Prophet Muhammad ever listened to from Jibril, which was Iqra. Please read.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jamal. This was amazing. Thank you for the effort you're doing. Thank you for everything you shared with us. It was a pleasure talking to you today. That
Likewise.
was all for today's episode. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
في حلقة اليوم حكينا على النسوية والإسلام، زوز مصطلحات اللي يشوفون في العادة متناقضين. جاءت الحركة النسوية الإسلامية باش تتحدى القراءة الذكورية الأبوية للقرآن اللي كانت موجودة على مر الزمان، وتنبه لأهمية القراءة النسوية للنص القرآني والحديث، وأهمية تجديد الحوار حول أحكام المرأة في الشريعة الإسلامية كيف إمامة المرأة مثلاً. حكينا زادة على الأهداف متاع الحركة النسوية الإسلامية وكيفاش تمكنا باش نشملوا نساء المسلمات ومختلف الهويات الجندرية في المجتمع، وتمكنا زادة باش ندافعوا على حقوق المرأة ومجتمع الميم في الإسلام. آخر نقطة حكينا فيها هي الحركة النسوية الغربية وإقصائها للنساء المسلمات من القضية النسوية، وأهمية مشاركة المرأة المسلمة والنظر إلى وضعيتها من منظور إسلامي يمكن المرأة المسلمة باش تحافظ على هويتها الإسلامية وتتمتع بحقوقها.